Hello everyone, welcome to today's lesson on interest. Alright, and so last time we talked about how we earn money. This time we're going to talk about how you can grow your money for free. Right? Or lose a lot of money as well. Right, so now with interest, right, interest often is associated with the savings account. Right, so there are two different bank accounts that we often see. And we got checking and savings. Now the checking account is often tied to debit cards. Right, so this is the money that you actually have. Right, so that's the money you actually have, and it is easy to take in or take out. So easy to put money in, and easy to take money out. Right, so if I say I have $500, it's in my checking account, right? This is the money I can just spend on a new set of Pokemon cards or spend on a new Nintendo game, right? So that's easily spendable money, or the money that you actually have, you can see. Right now, the savings account, right? Now the savings account, it's not as easy to take money in and out. Right, like oftentimes, yes, you can just take money out of a savings account, but that you can also consider something, say stocks, as a savings account, right? You have to sell the stocks first to get the money, the actual money out. Right, but savings account oftentimes earn you interest, which is again free money. We like free money. Okay, so now interest is oftentimes charged by a bank or credit union when you borrow money from them. Alright, so interest can be a bad thing. Right, sometimes, or not sometimes, oftentimes when you borrow money, you're often charged an extra fee on top of the money that you borrowed. Alright, so we call that a loan. You might, you might know about the good old phrase, the good old student loans. Alright, still currently paying off mine. So but luckily, here in Canada, BC, it is interest free, so you don't actually have to pay extra fee on top of that. Very lucky to have that. Not a lot of parts of the world actually have interest free student loans. Right, so yeah, we got loans. That's when banks charge you extra money on the things you borrow. Or, more important, the ones we like, is the fee that the bank pays you for keeping money in your savings. Right, if you just keep money in your savings and don't touch it, right, the banks will actually give you some free money, the interest on top of that, for keep your money in there. If you're curious why banks will just give you free money because savings account, right, that's because when you give the bank money in the savings account, the money is still yours, right? But the bank can use the money that you gave them to do other things. Right? The bank can take the money from your savings account to do investments that will earn the bank a lot more money than the interest they're paying you. Right? But again, of course, it's still your money, so the bank will still give your money back if you ever need to take money out of your savings. Right? But oftentimes, the money you give the bank in a savings account is used by the bank to make more money. Right? So, but again, at the end of the day, banks still need to make money somehow. Right? So it's like a win-win. Banks take some money they don't have to make more money for themselves, but they give you like a small cut of the money that you give them. Okay, that was just I can't believe I just explained what banking does in like 5 minutes. I didn't even know I knew that. Okay, anyways, so now let's talk about a simple interest. Right, so the more powerful type of interest is called a compound interest. You actually learn more about that in grade 10. But for now, we'll talk about simple interest. Right? Simple interest is just three numbers multiplied together. Right, so you got the principal here. That's the initial amount you give the bank or the initial amount you have to borrow. The annual interest rate, it's usually in percentage in the form of a decimal. Right, so that's the actual interest amount. The higher the better. Or the higher the more money you get. Or the higher the more money you have to pay out. Right, and then T is time in years. Very specifically, it's always going to be in years. Okay, so let's take an example here. All right, let's say we've borrowed $8,340. Okay? So there's a few different interest rates here. So, right here, in example A, right, our interest is 7.5 every year, or 7.5% every year at 2 years. When a 7.5% is just 7.5 divided by 100, which is 0.075 as a decimal. Right, we can just convert all of them here right now. 8% is 8 divided by 100, or 0.08. And then lastly, 3.6 is just that divided by 100, which is 0.036. Okay, so here's our percentages in our decimals. The first one, the interest, right? Again, we just let's multiply all together. Right, the principal, the initial amount is 8,340. Right, the annual interest rate is 7.5% or 0.075. And then the t is in time in 2 years, or t is in time in years, which is 2 years. Right, so your total interest is 1,251. Right, so by the end of the 2 years, not only do you have to pay back the bank the money you borrowed, you also have to pay out the money that you accrue through interest, which is 9,591. I said that's when interest is bad, right? If you take borrow money out, you have to pay some extra money on top of that when you return all the money. Second example, we got again 8,340 at the interest of 0.08. Right, but this is 7 months instead of a year, right? 7 months is pretty much just 7/12 of a year, right, which is 389.2. Right, if you remember our conversion factors, right, you can literally do it with conversion factors too, right? Because 7 months, we want to convert that from month to a year. Right, in 1 year we got 12 months. Right, so it's 7/12. Because those units cancel out. Or you can just say, oh, there's 12 months in a year, just 7 of them, so 7/12, right? Okay. So that added to 389.2. 8,729.2. Okay, so those are the nice and simple ones. Here comes C. Ideally, you would never have to do something like this, but I'm also showing you this as an example that this works for everything. Okay, so this is weird. We got January 27 to October 26 in 2017. So first of all, it's not a leap year because it's not divisible by 4. Okay, so let's count how many days do we have. Right, so in January, right, because if this is a set of days, right, from Jan 27 to October 26, it's amount of days, and we have 365 days in a year. So we just have to divide the total number of days by 365, and that's our time in reference to years, a year. Okay, so from January, we got, right, we start on 27th, so 27, 28, 29, 30, 31. 5 days. Oops, 5 days. We know in February, that's 28 days. It's not a leap year. March, 31 days. April, 30 days. May, 31 days. June, 30 days. July, 31 days. August, 31 days. September, 30 days. And October, right, we pay until the 26th. So 26 days. Now we add all that up. We have 273 days. Right, and of course, you want to convert that to a year. So we got days, year. In 1 year, there are 365 days. Alright, so our fraction here is 273 divided by 365. 5456. So the total, add them up. 8,564.56. Okay? So that's how I find interest. It's literally just three numbers multiplied together. Okay, and of course, we can rearrange those letters to find all the information we need, right? So what's the principal at 0.75% if you earned $27.15 in interest in 19 months or in 9 months? So let's take our formula here. Okay, we want to know what the principal is. Right, that's our unknown variable. So now we have to isolate the p. How to isolate the p? Right, we divide both sides by RT. Right, to isolate this variable, we have to move the RT to this side. So we do the inverse operation. So RT, to have RT here. So our principal is just the interest divided by RT. Right, and then we just plug all the numbers in. We know the interest earned is 27.15. The interest rate is 4.75% in a decimal. Alright, times 9 months. That times 9 over 12. Okay, be careful of the order of operations here. Right, and so in total, it's $762.11. That's our principal. Okay, so when put in a calculator, we do this first, and then this. Right, so we find what this number is, and then divide 27.15 by this whole number here. Because again, remember this order of operations. This is pretty much 27 divided by 15, or 0.15 divided by that. Right, just be careful with the order of operations here. Okay, next, what's the annual interest rate? Okay, what's the annual interest rate to earn around 1,500? Or if you have, if our initial amount is around 1,500 and we earned $61.15 in interest over 250 days, what is the R, right? What's the rate? So we isolate the R here, divide those both sides by PT. Right, so R is just I divided by PT, plug all the numbers in. So 61.15 or 1,488 times 250 over 365. Right, again, remember to watch out for the order of operations. You get 0.06, which is 6%. Right, and again, you can just leave it as a decimal if you like. Okay, number of years required for a deposit of this amount to earn this much at this interest. Right, so that's the last one we haven't done yet. Isolating T, divide both sides by PR. So we got 200 for 49 here. Right, so the principal is 1,850 times the interest rate of 0.045. Right, and that gets us to exactly 3. Or with our unit, 3 years. Right, remember, it's always in years. Right, if you get a decimal, say 0.7, then that's 0.7 times up, or 0.7 of a year. Okay. Here is our last little thing here on savings, or on interest and all. Right, this is before we get into budgeting. Right, so you want to put 500 into your savings. Right, so you have two options. And how much money would you have in each period? And what's the advantage, disadvantage of each? So option A, you lend to your parents for an interest rate of 5% for 1 year. So you give the 500 to your parents, and after a year, they will give you the 500 back on top of a 5% interest. Or secondly, you can give it to a bank, and after 3 years, they will give you an interest, or they will give you the 500 back with an 8% interest. Right? So let's take option A. Remember, our formula is just PRT. Right? The initial amount, the principal, is 500. And your parents are giving you 5%, so 0.05 as a decimal, over 1 year. Right? So the interest is 25 bucks. Okay, and let's assume that you do that for all 3 years. Right? So the total amount is your initial, which is 500, plus 25 times 3. Right? Again, assuming that they keep the offer for 3 years. So after 3 years, you get 575 bucks. And option B was a bank. Right? PRT. The principal is the same, but it's 8% interest this time. And after 3 years, over 3 years. Right? Because again, this is 8%. Again, interest is always every year, and it's 3 years, so you get the interest 3 times essentially. So that's 120. So the total is 500 bucks initial plus 120. That's the interest you earn, 620. All right, and now what are the advantages and disadvantages of each? Right, so of course, as you can imagine with your parents, it's easy access. Right, you can take the money out easily, and also it's every year, not every 3 years. After 3 years, right? So if you need some money after 1 year, then you can take it out right away, right? Because whereas as a bank, you have to wait 3 years. So if anything happens in like the 2-year mark, you still cannot have your 500 bucks back. Right, but as you can imagine, you get more money. Right, it's a higher interest. Right, and not much money from your parents. Right, so that's again a pretty common thing you can see. Right, savings accounts you can earn some pretty good interest rates, but you have to keep the money there for a long time. Okay, but that's about it for today's lesson. Right, so if you don't remember anything, all you need to know is this formula, the IPRT. Right, so the initial amount times the rate in decimal and T in years. Multiply it up, and that's how much interest you have to earn or you have to pay. Okay, so with that being said, good luck practicing.